Well, hello, children. It's Grandpa Joe. And in this video, I want to talk about the jobs I did growing up. And these were jobs, besides my dad's construction business and trucking business, I did have a few jobs for a little while anyway when I was growing up. And the first job I had was working for a gentleman named Tom Crawford, who was a paint contractor, and I worked with him, of course, painting houses. And actually, the first job we did was painting the high school that I went to. So then that was a huge job, and it was I knew nothing about painting, and I was slow as crap. So, and he got on me quite a bit. He was getting upset, because I was working so slow because I wanted to do a good job. I try to do the best that I can in everything I do, and I wasn't satisfied with the work I was doing, so it was taking me a really long time. And he's like, slap the paint on there and move on, and I just couldn't do that. So anyway, so that was my first job, and I worked on and off with him during the time that we went to the church, right? So he was a member of the church that my dad pastored, and while my dad was pastored there, I worked on and off with him, at different times. I also had a part-time job working for this drugstore called Rite Aid. So this was a big chain up in the southeast, all except Florida. So Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, that area in there were a lot of Rite Aid stores. And so I worked in one of those as a stock person and in whatever else. I don't remember running a register very much, but I'm sure I did a little bit. But that was part time. It didn't last long. My dad made me quit, because wanted me to, he started working, and so then it was time for me to go work with him. And let's see. Although it wasn't really a job, I also mowed the church lawn and got paid for that. Of course, none of the money went to me, went to my dad, but I did that too. But that's, during the summertime on the weekend. Me and Jeff Crawford, the Tom Crawford son, we were tasked with mowing the church lawn. And that was the only jobs that I had in high school, working with Tom Crawford and working at the Rite Aid store. And I used all the money that I made from that, basically to buy clothes and stuff. But, I did okay. Tom paid me, pretty well. The Rite Aid, of course, that was a minimum wage, but those are the only two jobs I had there. And then when I was in college, I worked in fast food. I worked for Long John Silver's, which is a fried fish place. I don't know if there's any around much anymore, but they sold fried fish and some chicken, so you can get chicken tenders or fried fish. And I worked there as a fry cook, right? So back there, slinging shrimps and fishes and French fries. So not a fun job, but it made me a little bit of money to pay for some books. So it was at least something, buy some clothes. But that was basically it. Those few jobs were the only jobs I had through high school and through college. That was it. Now, when I finally graduated with my BA degree in business, I think it was actually a BS degree in business, I went to look for a business job. Okay, so I really didn't know what kind of job it was that I was even supposed to be looking for. Okay, to be honest, because I freaking hated business school, um, and what am I gonna do? Manage a business, you know? So that's what I did. I applied for assistant manager job at Electronics Boutique, which is basically GameStop now. All right, so they I don't know if they were bought by what was GameStop or what, but now all the Electronics Boutique stores became GameStop. And I worked there for I think 2.5 years. Eventually, after the first year, I became store manager, and I worked in East Lake Square Mall, which is now defunct. It's now like a business center. It was in a rough area of town. There wasn't a whole lot of business there. Our store did really well, though, based on the amount of traffic that mall had. I think we were one of the busiest stores in the whole mall, to be honest. I had people, like 80% of my customers were people who came there just to buy video games and then get the heck out of there. Okay, they were afraid of their car getting stolen. But regardless of the terrible location, we did really good. And in most cases, we were ahead of the West Shore store, okay, which is downtown. We beat them regularly, and we were really close to the Premier store at University Square, which I think both of those malls are now gone. Okay, so all the malls, all the places I worked at no longer exist. And Electronics Boutique was basically a computer store. So they sold computer software, and it was mainly IBM compatibles, but they also had Macs, not I take that back, Apple software, some Macintosh, and Commodore 64, and also Amiga. Okay, probably never heard of Commodore Amiga, but they were small computers, and we sold software from them. The only software we didn't sell was for Tandy, and that's because that's a Radio Shack brand, and Radio Shack was the only company that sold Tandy software. So, but it eventually got taken over by video games, and even the computer software we sold was basically video games. So we kind of got out of the business software game and into video games, and it basically took over the store with the rise of Genesis and Super Nintendo. It basically took over the store, and then of course the newer systems that came along. But we sold like even expensive systems. Like we sold the Neo Geo, right, which was like $650 back when the Genesis and Super Nintendo were like $140. And what was bad about it is the games for the Neo Geo were like $200 to $300. So you could buy a whole system and like 2 or 3 games for the price of one Neo Geo game. And then we had basically any video game system that came out, we carried, and the games for it. So, and that was the funnest job I had, of course. Basically sitting around selling video games, talking about video games, and playing video games. Okay, so those were good times. Really enjoyed it. Didn't pay crap though. It didn't pay crap, but it did help to strengthen my computer skills. One of the nice things about that is that these software vendors, so like Microsoft and Lotus, which is basically a defunct company now, but Lotus used to be really big. They would come around and provide training on their software because they wanted you to be able to sell it, right? So they would come around and train you on all of their different applications, word processors, spreadsheets, databases, all this stuff, right? So a lot of good information, a lot of good exposure to business software. And, I had my own personal PC that my sister bought for me for college. And so access to that software allowed me to play around with it and understand how the software worked. So it was really good in that aspect, and that it improved my computer skills. And back then, you really had to know more about your computer in order to use it. So you couldn't just turn on your computer and, start using it. In a lot of cases, the computers didn't have hard drives. So everything was on floppy disk. And that meant that you had to what they called boot your PC with software, and depending on the particular software where you were going to use, you had to configure your PC to use it, right? It didn't have, everything wasn't automatic. You had to create configuration and auto exec bat files that gave commands to your computer on how to set up memory and all that stuff, right? So it wasn't just, the way it is now where you turn it on, you got this interface that's, easy to use. GUI interfaces didn't exist. You boot up your computer to C prompt, right? Or in most cases, A prompt, because you use floppy disks. So you really had to know a lot about your computer in order to use it. And working there, helping customers run their software, really helped build my computer skills. So it was a good job in the aspect that it helped develop my computer skills, which that's what I do now. Is I am a developer, and if it wasn't for working at Electronics Boutique, my computer skills would have been lacking, and I might not have got in the position where I am now. So, like I said, it didn't pay anything. And so I was looking for a job that paid more money, because I, couldn't really live on what they were paying. You had to be living with someone to share the rent, and you had to live in a pretty crappy place based on what they were paying. So my uncle Donnie on my mom's side was moving to Arkansas to this new hot dog production facility for the parent company that he worked for, which was Wilson Foods. And it's a company called Dixie Foods. And it was a plant that made hot dogs. That's it. And so a large number of people that worked in the Wilson Foods plant in Indiana were moving there to Arkansas to work in this facility, right? And so he told me about it, and there was a position that was open that didn't require a whole lot of experience in the meat industry, and they needed somebody that had some computer skills. And so I was hired there and moved to Arkansas to work at Dixie Foods. And basically what my job was that it was a plant in a small town, okay? And the facility, any hot dog facility or otherwise meat packing facility, has to chill the product down before they package it, right? And usually the way that happens is it runs through a brine shower. So they basically take water and add a lot of salt to it, and that's the brine, right? And then it's run through these chillers, which brings the temperature of the brine down below freezing. And of course, it doesn't freeze because of its high salt content. And then this is the product goes through a shower where it's being sprayed with this brine, which freezes the product, and then it can be packaged. Okay. Well, the problem is in that facility, they could not throw away the brine. That was too much salt for their water, you know, processing plant to be able to handle. And so they were going to incur serious fines if they dumped that brine. So they had to recondition it. Well, that isn't something that anybody in the meat industry had ever done. Surprisingly, nobody reused their brine. They dumped it. Well, so this was a new process and had to go under a review process by the USDA. So all these records needed to be kept of the process. And then after a long enough time and a long enough review, if it appeared that the reconditioning process successfully reduced the amount of bacteria and contaminants to a low enough level, safe level, then it would be approved, and they could just continue the process. So my job was to basically collect all those records in a database and create reports for the USDA. So all the temperatures that we took, all the salinity levels, they did bacterial counts, right? So all these samples and stuff that they took, I had to add all that information to a database. So that was part of my job. And the other part was the smokehouse areas. They had 2 smokehouses. They had a contract cleaning crew that cleaned all the plant except for those 2 smokehouses. I don't know why. That's just the way it was. And so the other part of my responsibility was to manage these guys that clean the smokehouses. So they would come into what they call the third shift, and they would work the smokehouses until they were shut down, and then they would clean them. So my job was to collect all this information regarding the brine reconditioning system for the USDA, and then to manage the guys. Manage the guy that ran the brine reconditioning system, and then manage the guys who cleaned the smokehouse. Well, eventually, I took over sanitation of the entire facility. The contract cleaning crew that we had were basically high on meth all the time, and unsurprisingly, did a really crappy job cleaning the facility. So they took that over themselves, and they hired this guy to do it, which he was a complete failure. And when he failed, they brought me on, and I took over, and it was very successful. Well, they didn't increase my salary at all when I took over sanitation of the whole facility. So before, I watched 5 guys and put some stuff in a computer. Now I'm managing an entire cleaning crew that's responsible for the sanitation of the entire facility, which not even the contract cleaning crew did that, because there was the 2 smokehouses and the brine reconditioning system that they had no part of. Okay, now I'm in charge of everything, and not one dime extra. So after I think it was 6 months After about 6 months of that, and asking him, say, hey, what's the deal on my salary? The other guy that you brought, and at the time I was making $25,000, and I had a minor raises because I was there for like a couple years. So I had some, little bit of raise from that. But the guy that they hired that failed, couldn't do the job, they hired him in at $60,000 a year, more than twice what I was making. And they wouldn't give me any more money. So I'm like, listen, I'm killing myself doing this. And it's like, you haven't got me anybody to help me. You promised that you would, let me hire somebody to help me out here. I mean, I don't have a day off. I'm working every single day. This is baloney. And you haven't given me any increase of pay. And it's like, well, you don't have the same qualifications that the guy did. And I said, qualifications, smalifications. The guy couldn't frickin' do it. And I could. You should give me the money. So anyway, I left there and came back, and I went to work for a company called Big Lots, which probably is still around, right? It is at, the time I'm making this video. But basically they would take, it was like a discount store, a super discount store, I guess you'd say. And they basically take damaged containers anytime that there's a truck that runs off the road, or a train that gets, the cargo gets damaged in some way. Basically, Big Lots would buy those containers. So not all the product would be damaged, just, a portion of it. But these companies would just write off the whole container, right? And so Big Lots would buy those and then sell them in their stores at a greatly reduced price, right? And of course, they had their own stuff that they would purchase, from China. So it's basically a bunch of Chinese cheap crap, and then stuff that they bought as a result of some kind of damage to a shipping container. So I worked for them for a little while. And then I went to work for Dixie Foods again. So I'm working at Big Lots, and they don't pay very much. Okay, and I just got married, and I got a kid, and I need money now. And so I'm looking for a new job. And I got a call from the guys that I worked with at Dixie Foods, and they were asking me to come back to Arkansas to work for this company named Boar's Head. Okay, well, I never heard of Boar's Head before. I didn't know what that was. But, I wasn't going to risk moving back to Arkansas with my now new family on the advice of these, guys that I knew that worked in this other company. So I was like, I don't know. But then I got a call from Dixie Foods, okay, which is in Arkansas. So what happened is that these guys left Dixie Foods and they went to work for Boar's Head. They called me to, it's the same city. They want me to come work for Boar's Head. Well, then Dixie Foods called. And they're like, hey, we want you to come work for us in QA. And we're going to give you, $35,000 a year. I said, okay, well, that's more money. That'll be good. Also, remembering from the time I worked there before, the cost of living there in Arkansas is greatly reduced, okay? From living in Tampa, Florida, the cost of living there in Arkansas was nothing. So I'm like, okay, this will work out. And so packed up the family and we moved to Arkansas to work for Dixie Foods. Well, it turns out that Dixie Foods, that job was a complete and total sham. That company, which is now owned by Thornapple Valley, so they got sold like 2 or 3 different times. So it was Wilson Foods, and then they got sold to Doscocil, and they got sold to some other company, and then finally they were owned by Thornapple Valley. Okay, well, they were basically had tainted product, had what was it, listeria in their product. And sanitation had always been an issue in this plant, and I can bring a whole nother video about that. But they knew that they had listeria in their product, and they were hiding it from the USDA. And so to avoid getting caught with this product, they were exporting everything they made in that facility to Korea and Russia. So they wanted me to work there in the QA department and sign off on all these export documents. Basically, this was the manager of the QA department. Didn't want to be responsible for signing these export documents because she knew that they contained listeria and could kill people. So she hired me so that I could take the blame. Well, it didn't take me very long to figure out that something was wrong, and I wasn't about to sign those export documents. And it's like, I don't even know what I'm signing here, so I'm not taking responsibility for the quality of our product when I don't know what the quality of our product is, and I have no control over anything that's going on, and I'm not being trained. So now that I was there at Dixie Foods, I had been talking to the guys over at Boar's Head, right? Which was, like, I don't know, 5 miles away. So I was been talking to them, and they said, hey, we need an IT guy. And I was like, and we know that you were good with computers, so, we want you to come work for us. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go over there and interview. And so I went over there and interviewed with a gentleman named Rich Holland, which was probably one of the best people that I've ever worked for in my entire life. This guy was the greatest. And went in and interviewed. He said, yeah. He said, we'll take it. And I said, well, I'm going to, put in my 2 weeks notice. He says, no, he says, I need you Monday. So, if you're going to come work here, I need you right away. So I was like, all right. So I went back and quit Dixie Foods. Of course, they wanted to, hassle me because they paid for me to move, right? So they paid for my move up to Arkansas. And so when I gave my resignation, I basically gave my resignation stating that I wasn't being trained and I wasn't comfortable in my position with no training. Well, when I gave that to the QA manager, she told me, well, that's fine, but don't turn this in like, saying that you wouldn't get trained, and, because that would look bad on her. Just tell them that, you found another job. If you can do that for me. And I was like, fine, whatever, So I turned in my resignation to the plant manager, I'm leaving. And so when I went and talked to him, now, by the way, I knew that I was being used as a patsy because I talked to one of the other QA girls and finally got her, begged her to tell me what was going on. And she finally told me all the dirty secrets, right? So I knew what was up. And so when I turned my resignation in to the plant manager, he's like, I can't believe you would do this to us, Joe. I mean, we paid for you to come up here and, did all this stuff, and yada, yada, yada. And it's, I can't believe you did this to us. And I was like, really, Jerry? I said, well, when I was here before and basically you were underpaying me by about $40,000. But you didn't seem like you very cared about me. I said, now when you called me back and said as your patsy, to keep you guys from getting, to take the fall when the USDA finds out about your listeria issue. You want me to take the fall for you? I said, oh, screw you guys. I'm not your patsy. And he goes, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, well, then maybe you should talk to your QA manager. He said, I'm pretty sure you know what's going on, Jerry. You got to be part of this at this point. And I says, you're not going to lie to me. I said, I know what's going on. I said, I'm not going to be a patsy. So I left and went over to work for Boar's Head, right? So at Boar's Head, I was a computer technician. I built computers. I helped people with computer problems. Any computer integrated equipment that they had, I worked on, and stuff like that. That was hard work, though. I mean, it was a 60-day week. And I did a lot of work at other facilities, setting up stuff. We did everything ourselves. So when we would go to put a computer system in place, for example, like a scanning station or anything like that out on the floor, we had to install that ourselves. We had to run all our own network cables because they didn't have Wi-Fi at that time. So we had to run all our own network cables. We had to run our own conduit for electricity, okay? So you need power for your machine. Well, we had to run our own conduit, electrical cable, to the equipment so we could plug it in. So there's quite a bit of hard work, crawling up in attics and stuff like that. So it wasn't just your regular run-of-the-mill computer guy job. This was, many times strenuous work. And like I said, the hours were long because, they ran 2 shifts. And IT needed to be there for both shifts in case something happened, right? So anyway, during that time, I was able to further develop my computer skills. And while I was working for them, I learned about databases and about a certain level of programming and how to develop websites. So while I was there at Boar's Head, I taught myself these things. I taught myself how to use databases, taught myself to develop, and I taught myself specifically how to develop web pages, right? So I worked with Boar's Head for 6 years, I think. And so your grandmother, Alita, was pressuring me to move back to Florida to the point where she just took the kids and, left. Was going to leave me there in Arkansas. And, when you decide you want to come to Florida, we'll be here, kind of a thing. And that's another story. But anyway, I got transferred from working at Boar's Head to Sarasota to work in the sales department to help them generate these distributor reports that they were trying to do, okay? Because they were never able to collect information, good information, from the distributors and compile it, right? So that was the effort that we were trying to do. And I worked for this guy named Sean. I can't remember his last name now. But anyway, great guy. And we created, kind of pieced together this application to pull all this distributor information and compile it into a report that they could use, right? So I worked there for a while, and eventually the headquarters for Boar's Head moved down to Sarasota. So eventually my job changed from, working in the sales department to being technical services manager. over. So basically, I was in charge of all the technicians and all the facilities, basically. So, big promotion there at Boar's Head. And eventually, my boss and then the director of IT either left or were fired. Okay. And a new director came on who was a financial consultant that they were using. He got fired from his consulting position, and they hired him to be the new IT director. Okay, well, this guy knew nothing about IT, but they were in the process of trying to implement this enterprise software solution. And I looked into it, and it was a complete and utter nightmare. This was the worst software I had ever seen. It was super out of date. And I was like, this is the crappiest thing I've ever seen. And so I was really against it, right? And I was trying to warn, the upper management that I, knew, listen, this software is not good. It's not going to be good. You're never going to get to work. It's going to be a waste of money. And because of that, they took that to mean that, I wasn't on board, right? And I'm happy to do whatever it is that they want to do. I told them that. I said, if this is a software solution that you decide to buy and you want to implement it, I will do everything in my power to make this thing work. Okay? I'm just telling you that, in my opinion, this isn't going to provide to you what you think it will. Okay? You've been hoodwinked. Okay? This is, a salesman has, lied to you about this stuff. Okay? It's not going to do what you think what they're telling you it's going to do. It's not going to be able to do. So, because of that, they fired me. Okay? So now I'm in Florida and just been fired. And they gave me a good, severance package and everything. But this was at a bad time to get hired. This was in the .NET boom when it burst, right? So there aren't a whole lot of IT jobs out there now because everybody's getting fired. So I'm looking for a job in the middle of this, and the only thing I could find was a job working for Aaron Sales and Lease as basically a bill collector. Okay, so Aaron Sales and Lease is a place that's sells or leases furniture, TVs, stuff like that, right? And my job was to call people every day and try to get them to make a payment, okay, or to go and pick up their stuff. I never got to do any sales, which I would have been much better at, by the way. I was in collections. They called it account management, but it was collections, right? Calling up people, hey, why haven't you paid your bill? You need to pay your bill, We're going to come and get your stuff, right? And then I would go get their stuff. So, the worst job I've ever had in my life. It was not suited to me at all, and I was horrible at it. Okay, because I had my own bills, and I'm calling up these people. Dang it, you need to pay your bill. I haven't paid mine, but you need to pay yours. So, felt pretty bad about the whole situation. But thank God, I got another opportunity to work in IT. A friend of our family's from a long time ago, when we lived in Florida as a little kid, actually one of my babysitters, she worked for the clerk of circuit court in Manatee County. And she said, hey, we got a job opening. This is my mother went to this church reunion, right? And she was there and was telling her about, the fact that I was looking for a job and it was, really rough out there. And so she hooked me up with an interview. I got the job. and that, which turned into a web development position. And so I worked there at the clerk of circuit court. And I'd been working there a while and had a big falling out with I guess it was CTO at the time. They started using those titles. She was the director, and then she became the CTO. And she was doing some stuff that was sketchy, and she's kind of, she was having, we and her were having issues basically. And so turns out that Boar's Head needed a developer for the new enterprise system that they were putting in place, because the enterprise system that I said wouldn't work didn't work, and now they needed something else. So now they're going to hire me to be a developer. So I went over there. I was over there for a couple years working on their legacy stuff. And then I had been working with the 12th Judicial Circuit Court, doing, some work for them, different programs they wanted for their website. And the big one was e-warrants. So I developed this e-warrant system for them. And so they knew what I could do as far as development. And so when they could, they called me up and asked me to come work for them as their website developer, or just developer in general. So I went to work for them, and here I am, still working for the 12th Judicial Circuit Court. And this is the best job I've ever had. It's not the funnest job. Electronics Boutique was the funnest job, but they didn't pay crap. And their, management sucked. But here at the 12th Judicial Circuit Court, I'm working for good people. They treat me right. And it's working in website development and, just development in general. It's a field I'm interested in, so I'm having a good time and making decent money, and hopefully even enough to retire on. So that's the whole spiel, one into the other. That's how Papball got to where I am, and all the jobs I ever had.